Hey guys, today we're sitting down with Dave to talk about how transit relates to food access. Hey Dave,
Hey, how you doing?
good. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
Sweet. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll just go ahead and get started. I have a couple of questions for you just so that we can kind of build this framework around why these two things are related. So, I have two questions and you can answer them either together or separately. So I have one that
Okay.
says, how did you come into transit as a whole? And then how
Mhm.
did you get acquainted with the food sovereignty movement?
Okay. Um, I started riding transit in 2000 when I went to Michigan State. When you go to college, like a lot of the big colleges in Michigan, you get a transit pass included with your student ID, so you can
Oh,
ride the buses for free. So I learned how to kind of get around campus. Did a lot of biking around there. A couple years later, I went to Western University, Western Michigan, and started riding the buses there. One of the mistakes I made at Michigan State was I brought my car and
okay.
I didn't really meet a whole lot of people as I was driving around by myself. So when I
Mm,
went to Western, I left the car at home, learned how to use the bus system, and learned, oh, it doesn't run on Sundays, and how to get around town, and just how long it actually takes to get around by bus.
mm,
And then I started riding transit on vacations, Seattle, Miami, different places, and just figuring out what else is out there. And probably around 2008, I started looking at the transit system in Southeast Michigan. And it actually wasn't until 2016 that I started riding the bus here. Um, by 2016, the RTA vote was coming out on the ballot, and I started getting interested in promoting transit and started doing it on Facebook and Twitter. And thought, if I'm going to promote transit here, I need to learn how to ride the smart bus and figure out where it goes.
yeah.
And that first experience was quite an experience, just trying to figure it out with the app, looking at the signs. I didn't have exact change, so I went to a bank and I walked across the street and got change, and then I had to go back to the other side and get on the bus. And um, by the time I got a few miles away, I got a phone call from the car shop saying my car was done. So I just
Mm,
got right back on and went back again. Um, but very quickly realized, like, wow, there's buses here, but they don't, just to get home a few miles from where was the car shop,
mm.
was like 45 minutes to an hour and three buses. And I
Oh,
thought, well,
wow.
this is something needs to change with this. Um, so I went very quickly from advocating for suburbanites to ride the bus to games in Detroit and concerts and things like that to realizing the big inequities in the bus system and how much larger of an issue it actually is than just riding the bus for fun. Um, it's a thing that affects over 100,000 bus riders in Detroit.
Mm,
Whether it's missing connections, whether it's trying to switch buses at the Detroit City line to try to get to work, cities that opt out, leaving people without the option to work there or shop or go to the hospitals in those cities.
right.
So it's it's very easy to see, go down the rabbit hole and see just how big of an issue it really is and how many people it really affects.
Mm, wow. Yeah, that reminds me of my experience. I didn't start riding the bus alone until high school. I think I was like a sophomore in high school. And I honestly,
Mhm.
I kind of knew how to ride it, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And they had recently built like a line that was closer to my home. So my parents were like, yeah, you're fine. You can go take it. Like you can walk up to the bus station to get to school every day. And I got to school and my dad was like, he dropped me off for like the last time. And he was like, okay, you have to ride the bus home. Like you got to learn how to figure this out. Like you have to figure this out. And I couldn't figure it
Yeah.
out. So because I was just getting lost. So one of my classmates, she's actually one of my closest friends now. I was like, hey, do you mind riding the bus with me this week so I can figure out how to get through this thing? And she was like, yeah, here you go. And she like explained the whole thing and she got me to where I was doing everything. I would take my bike, take it onto the bus and, anything like that. That gave me a
Mhm.
whole new sense of freedom. And even at 15, I thought
Yeah.
I was at the world, I was like, oh, I can do anything I want. I can ride the bus.
Oh, yeah.
All right, very cool. So how did you come to like when did you first learn of like the food security movement, food sovereignty? I know before when we spoke, you mentioned that you kind of really wanted to work on a farm. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Oh, sure. In high school, it was about 15, 16 years old, and parents said, "All right, you got to get a job." So I started looking in the local paper, and I found an advertisement for a farmer looking for a farmhand, and thought, well, this sounds like a lot of fun. And I called the guy up. He's actually in the 70s, and he said, well, it's a hard. He actually spoke to me about an hour, kind of trying to talk me out of it in some ways, just telling me how he's had such a hard time over the years trying to hire someone to come and pitch manure and bale hay and do all that stuff on the farm.
Yeah.
And I I never knew either of my grandfathers. They both passed before I was born, and one of them was a farmer.
Oh,
So he kind of became a bit of a surrogate grandfather, and I ended up working there for all through high school, and then part of college. When I come home, I'd go and help him out, and um, knew him for many years after that. But I just really enjoyed the whole experience of working in the fields with the tractors, working with the animals, everything from repairing stuff on the farm. There for a while, I started looking into agricultural jobs around the country.
mhm.
There's different websites for placement for that, and it just never quite worked out, just with my life situation. But it was definitely something I wanted to do at one point. Nowadays, I just do a little gardening on the side of the house and grow some squash and tomatoes and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I mean, as long as you're growing something, that's it's still cool in my book.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But
we
it's
oh
hard
yeah.
to go ahead. I was
No,
just say
no, go
it's
ahead.
hard to ignore if you follow any kind of if you follow any kind of like urban development news in Detroit.
Mhm.
It's kind of a hot topic when you see like, oh, there's no chain grocery stores in Detroit, or there's a food desert in Detroit. You start looking around and like, well, why is that? And are there really grocery stores? And things have gotten better in the last decade. There's a couple Meyer, there's the Whole Foods, for certain groups that can afford some of those places like that. But there's a lot of community grocery stores. They just don't really make the news. Um, but at the same time, there's
Mhm.
the way they're scattered about and the way transit is set up in Detroit. There's a lot of places that you can't reach by transit.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where we see it, where like, having a community garden is necessary, especially in spaces where you don't have direct access to grocery stores or those bigger box grocery stores. Having something in your community that is for you guys that you put in is incredibly important. But what we're finding too is that even in those areas where, there might be a garden down the street, or there might be a farmer's market that we can reach, or even an independent market inside the neighborhood, it's not always something that everybody can get to simply because they don't have transportation. So that's kind of how we
Mhm.
see it all coming together, because as we work towards a new kind of way of thinking, a new way of just life in general, moving away from that work system to, being at home with our families more and tending to the earth more,
Yeah.
we'll see a huge shift in people just needing more access to these resources. So as we dig deeper into reinvesting into our communities, transit is definitely, almost number like, hand in hand. It's like, I don't want to say number one because it's all, it needs to be done holistically, but transit is
Mhm.
definitely plays a large role in that.
So to talk about a future vision of where things are headed, we need to look at where things are at right now, and the fact that Detroit's transit, DDOT, is a department of the city, and
Mhm.
their funding comes from the city budget. So to improve that transit, the city budget would have to amend and provide more money for them. Um, Same thing, SMART is based on the millage, and the only way for them to improve their service is to ask for bigger millage, and that's where the RTA comes in, with a taxing mechanism to help get more money for both systems and oversee them and help that out. So the first thing that would have to happen to really improve the system in the future would be for some type of funding mechanism to improve it.
Mhm.
Um, so in 2022, the RTA is gearing up for another push for a regional transit system, and for funding. there's been a big change of leadership in Oakland County after over 20 some years of Brooks Patterson, who was very anti-regional governments and anti-Detroit for that matter, and a
Wow.
very anti-transit. So to have a change with Dave Coulter, who was the former mayor of Ferndale, very pro-transit, that's on his agenda to get something going. And if we have to leave out Macomb County to get it done, then that's on his to-do list. So if
Mm.
that first step needs to take place, so that I guess to look at the future, there's two kind of timelines that could happen. One is our region still holds us back and we don't get funding and things kind of remain as they are. So in 50 years, we might still have buses. They might be electric by then, but we might just still have the same buses going around the neighborhoods and, autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles and things like that. Or we could lock in a funding mechanism for the next 20 years that will build a robust system that will connect the suburbs and the city together and help out the neighborhoods with more frequent buses and more frequent service. Um, that funding might help buses like the Russell bus that doesn't run on Saturdays through Eastern Market on the market day. That funding could help something like that run. It could improve service to connect people to jobs in the suburbs. So 50 years out, I mean, if you look 50 years ago, we you know, we had buses 50 years ago, and things today aren't that much different. We still have diesel buses going around the city, just
Yeah.
like there were. So there's not been a ton of changes. I mean, we have bike share, we have scooters, we have a few things that we didn't see coming. Back then, even 10 years ago, I wouldn't have predicted bike sharing or these scooters that are everywhere.
Hmm.
So what the future in 50 years looks like in 2070, um, there we could have more of the same still, if things don't change, if we don't get
Yeah.
funding, or we could have just a very robust system that connects the airport to the city, that connects major cities like Ann Arbor and Flint to Detroit and the region. So 10 years from now, I'm hoping that we have that funding mechanism in place and that our state stops focusing on cars and wide highways and wide roads, which are dangerous for people to get around on, to more equitable solutions and roads that are safer for everyone, for people and
Right.
cyclists and people, children especially.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's something to really consider. I don't think that a lot of people outside of the city understand just what goes into making changes on that scale, right? If you're
Yeah.
just coming in to visit, you might think, oh wow, oh this isn't walkable, or oh man, like this, right?
Mhm.
But if you don't really know from that level, like what goes into that, like this isn't just like, it doesn't look like this or it doesn't operate like this because everyone who lives here wants it to operate like that. It's just this is the lot
Yeah,
that we've been handed. Yeah.
exactly. Yep. I've been doing a lot of history research recently for an article I'm writing, and it focused on the role of transit in the 40s during World War II.
Hmm.
And that was really the start of the decline of Detroit's transit system. And one of the big reasons was the city was very segregated. There were only so many places that, it was very much a white city back then, and people from all over that had migrated to the city were forced to little pockets here and there. A lot of the
Yes.
African Americans that migrated from the South could only live on Hastings Street in that area in Black Bottom, and there was a what they called a color line on John R. And you could cross it to get on the streetcar, but you weren't really allowed to mingle in certain places. And there was a lot of tension on public transit. There were a lot of fights through World War II, and
Mm,
rather than invest in improved transit, it just kind of lingered on as it was. Meanwhile, they spent billions of dollars to build highways, and they displaced neighborhoods, and they um, allowed people to move to the suburbs and drive back down to the jobs in Detroit. But it left out whole groups of people from moving out of the city and from accessing those things. And then with subpar transit, it's played an even bigger role in holding back people from prosperity. So that's been a huge issue, that transit. It's not just because they ended the streetcars and we just had buses ever since. It's been a very intentional um, act to hold back public transit in Detroit.
yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's literally a history of it. Do
Hmm.
you feel like there is a role for our car manufacturers to play in making the city? I know that, they make cars, but like in making our city more walkable,
Mhm.
right? How do you think that's a role that they could play, or something that they could, or do you think that there's something that they could fulfill in that aspect? We are the motor city, so it's like, we
Mhm.
don't want to not make cars, but is there something that we can really do? Our big three, in terms of getting just wheels or getting other modes of transportation into the hands of the people.
There's been a big shift in the last few years with car companies. They no longer talk about, um, they don't use the word like traffic, and they're focusing on the word mobility now. And
Okay.
mobility has a wider range of meaning from not just driving in cars, but to public transit. Mobility is on foot for people who are disabled. There's all kinds of different meanings for the word mobility. The dictionary also has a meaning for being able to better oneself and moving up in the world. And those two are directly tied to each other in Detroit. That if you
Yeah.
don't have physical mobility, you're not going to have financial mobility to move up and to
Right.
do better for yourself and your family. So, car companies are doing a lot of, I don't want to say double talk, but they are. There's a lot of lip service to. They have a product they sell, and they want it to be. They recognize the devastation that it's caused.
Hmm.
Detroit cities like Woodward, or their streets, Woodward, Grand River, Gratiot, Fort, all those streets used to be half as wide as they are now, and they widen them to double their size for cars. And then when the cars emptied out on the highways, you're left with these really wide roads that people can drive so fast on. And there's all kinds of accidents or crashes between pedestrians and cyclists and cars on these roads. And I think they're finally starting to recognize, like, wait, driving as fast as you can should not be the goal. We need to make streets safer for people, whether they're in cars or out of cars. So the city of Detroit has developed a Streets Are for People program, and
Hmm.
they're looking at all kinds of ways to make the streets safer for everybody, whether they're in a car or they're on foot or they're on a bicycle. And I think Ford moving to Corktown and setting up his autonomous vehicle headquarters there is going to play a big role in that. There's also a talk about a autonomous vehicle corridor on Michigan Avenue between Detroit and Ann Arbor. That'll be on
Okay.
Michigan Avenue and on 94. And one of the biggest things
Okay.
with that is, people driving cars by themselves aren't the greatest judge of. You can't see if someone's gonna try to cross the street in front of you, or you might be distracted by your phone or your display on your car. Or you're looking around at different things. Autonomous vehicles are going to have they're going to have cameras all over them to be able to sense that, and they're starting to realize that speed isn't the greatest thing; it's safety. And car companies are starting to, I think, as the tech merges with the cars, we're going to see a lot more focus on safety and how cars interact with people on the streets.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, we're gonna wrap up here shortly, but before we do, I just
Hmm.
wanted to ask, given I'm not sure that this would be your dream, but like in a dream situation, someone comes up to you and they say, "Hey, we're redoing transit. We're trying to figure this out. We want to make some stuff more walkable. We want to make things a lot safer. We just need to make we need to make a plan." So, Dave,
Hmm.
what would be your vision? Let's say somebody gives you 5 years to really implement something dope in the city, that inside the city that connects us to outside the city, however, but what would you say is like your kind of like your personal vision in terms of like, yeah, that would be really cool to see?
Uh, um, as far as like connecting, like where I see transit going, and
Yeah. So in terms of like, okay, this is kind of where I see it going, but if I had it my way, this is what this would look like. Like if I got to design it myself, kind of a thing.
okay. Um, I guess the first thing I would look at would be transit oriented development, and not only improving transit but designing around those corridors and then connecting them, because Detroit is shaped like a spoke. We have all the
Hmm.
roads that spoke out this way, but to be able to improve these major lines, but then connect them all to each other.
Hmm.
Um, so it's kind of like that now, but there's a lot of those connector lines aren't as frequent. The spoke lines are fast, but the connector lines are maybe every 45 minutes to an hour, which if you miss one bus, that's a long time to wait on,
Yeah. Now I'm
especially on
late
days like
for
this when
work.
it's so cold. Exactly. You're late for work.
I'm
but
freezing, yeah, all of that.
exactly. And then concentrating on building access to groceries and fresh food and things like that at those hubs. So rather than being in the middle or like, far away, to make everything more connected.
Yeah, that's
I guess, does
dope.
that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. That reminds me, I spent some time living over in the DC area and I was working and going to school in the city. And yeah, that's really how it is. You know, you've got your green line, your blue line, your orange line, your purple line, all of that.
Hmm.
And then each one is connected. But even in a big city like that, you know, even just waiting to get on to that, that for that's the metro. It's not just
Hmm.
their bus system, but their bus system is still very closely linked to their transit system. And they try to do a good job of like getting those buses outside of just the city,
Hmm.
so getting to a lot that might have your car in it, that's not, you don't have to pay all day, there's another bus that might take you there, stuff
Sure.
like that. Yeah, I personally would love to see more and more of those things pop up, because what I started to see where, you go over to Greenbelt Station, or you go over to, I'm trying to think of the other one that I used to go to all the time. Maybe I shouldn't tell all my business, but yeah, those frequently, especially if it was the summer or getting
Hmm.
warmer and things outside, they started to do those things like pop-ups where we've got farmers markets, pop-ups where we've got places where people can buy
Hmm.
more like groceries, or just stuff where people can barter for stuff, flea
Yeah.
markets and things. I personally would really love to see more of that, kind of how you were saying, where at these connector spots there's hubs, there's stuff for people to do, there's warming beyond just like warming tents and things.
Yeah.
There's, oh, over here I was waiting for the bus, I was able to pick up some free produce today, that kind of a thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't take but a minute to realize when you start riding the bus that, the connections between different routes and different systems takes a minute, and it's
Yeah.
definitely a slower lifestyle. You have more time to wait, and um, so yeah, it'd definitely be nice to be able to shop for things and have, because Detroit has lost a lot of those hubs around the neighborhood, because it was made up of different communities all throughout the city. If you look at a map of Detroit, that has the neighborhood names, there's like 100 different neighborhood names
Yeah.
for every little intersection around the city, and then the buses go through all of them. But you have areas where there's just been disinvestment, and there's, you can tell a corner where there used to be a cluster of buildings and services and dry cleaners and
Mhm.
flower shops and bakers and butchers and all that kind of stuff, and we've kind of lost a lot of that, and to concentrate on rebuilding in those areas like that.
Yeah, our hope, honestly, is that as we grow, as Finnegan's Farms gets bigger and we get to meeting more people, and we've got more bigger projects going in and around the city, whether that's a market build over here, or a farm stand over here, or just, community garden over there.
Hmm.
We really do hope that as we continue to help people and support communities and individuals in setting up these hubs, that transit and things like that go alongside with that. Obviously
Yeah.
we don't do transit. I don't know too much about cars, other than I know how to take care of mine when it's broken and I like the way they look. But
Yeah.
other than that, that's not really my expertise. So I'm
Mhm.
really excited that we got to sit down and talk with you today,
Yeah.
because I think you provided a whole other level of insight that people just don't know. They don't see it, and our communities are beautiful. Our community